How do
So
you
we're talking about foretelling the forecast. We're talking about the weather forecast.
We're talking about forecasting the forecast. Oh, did you ever
Computers.
watch Twister? You need those little like ball things that they let go in the storm. You know what I'm talking about?
What are some other? Yeah, write us in at we'reexpertspod@gmail.com with your weather colloquialisms that you always thought were normal, and we'll reassure you that we've never heard of them and they're
Never
crazy
heard
but cute.
one.
Like, I'm ready to just like dive in and start talking some serious weather. But the reason I'm like that is because I'm an atmospheric scientist or meteorologist.
And then I feel like they just came up with like sailors just had little rhymes like green wave, sailor's fright, red sky, sailor's delight. Like that was the weather report.
Red sky at morning, sailor take warning. Exactly. And it's
Oh, okay, I was close.
you were very close. See? It's a lot.
Jackie didn't think I had something there.
Because when the air goes down, it evaporates, and when it goes up, it condenses. And that's one of the most fundamental things in atmospheric science. Air goes up, you get clouds. Air comes down, it dries out.
It's atmospheric science 101, Jackie.
That-
Okay.
I think I've learned more in this conversation than I did in my 4 years of college.
And, also, I think about this just because of what I do for work, but, have some insurance. Even if you don't own a house, if you're a renter and you're on the first floor, it's not that expensive to add some flood insurance on there for, your contents. So that way, if a flood happens to come in, maybe you don't own the house, it's an apartment, but you'll get a check for all the stuff that you lost. And then you can replace it. And that's one of the big things they're always saying is turn around, don't drown, turn around, don't drown. And they show that pie chart that says, it's like over 60% of flooding deaths, people driving into water.
Well, and I'm terrified of drowning in my car. Like it's a legit real fear of mine. So that's very good advice. I also would never drive through water because of that fear.
Like that's pothole, it's got water in it. I'm gonna turn around, go home. And that was our sports summary. Now over to Jackie with the weather.
Well, this is a mental breakdown because my notebook just says things like Kelvin, evaporation point, forecast, like
forecast. Howdy, hi, hello, friends, lovers, enemies, strangers, all are welcome to the pod. Let's all find out how to be experts on We're Experts Now with your co-host, me, Rebecca.
And I'm Jackie. Happy to be back for another week, Bex. Good to see you.
Great to see you. Great to see you settling into your new digs. I'm loving the pod loft evolution.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for recognizing it was a loft because I always wanted a loft and a window seat when I was growing up. And I now have one.
Yeah, window seat. That's a good aspiration. I like that.
That was like a dream. Like we moved a lot when I was a kid, and every time we like saw a house and it had a window seat, I would be like, I want this one. And my parents would be like, we don't really like you. You're our least favorite child, so no window seat for you.
Wow.
Direct quote. It was rough.
Yeah. Your family will do you like that.
What have you been up to lately? What have you been getting into?
Well, what have I been up to? Here's something I've been tossing around the old noggin lately. How long is too long to be on a dating app? Like when do you just pack it up and pack it in? Or pack it up because you're not packing it in, if you know what I mean. When do you expire on the dating apps? And I know society would lead you to believe that, women over 25, once you're past the DiCaprio days, you're over. But, what do you... I just find myself, like, in these... Like that, like it's my first resource, You break up with someone and you're like, well, back to the apps. How many times can you go back to that well,
I mean, I think I'm probably around like 50 or 60. I have been on and off dating apps for probably 10 years. I think like I got on dating apps like after a relationship in my mid 20s. So around maybe 25, 26, I got on them the first time. I've quit. I've had many boyfriends over that time. I've also just been like burnt out. A couple years ago, I was like, I'm over dating, and I took a break from dating. But
I always say that, but I come back to it because it's like it's another one of my social media apps. It's like gotta see if I'm traveling, gotta see what the people look like in this area, or if I'm just like bored, gotta see what people are up to and thinking about. It's just like another way to doom scroll.
I think it's also like when I was traveling a lot when I drove like cross country, for example, it's a really great way to like meet people in the city.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like you and I have traveled decent amounts, especially for work and whatnot, and it can get really lonely if you're on the road for a long period of time and you're by yourself. So, a little hangout, just grab a drink with somebody, hear about the city can be pretty cool. But when you're living that dating life app, you're right. It's a lot. I think culture's starting to change. I think that was the go-to for the last few years, and I'm wondering if we're kind of post-pandemic trying to get back to that human interaction.
There are a few people that I've met in real life, but it just seems like, oh, maybe you meet in real life and then you see each other on the apps, and now you
Mhm.
have like a little bit of an inroad to start that conversation. But yeah, I think, especially in this era of my life, I think I'm just more of a like, I'm gonna shake some things up. I'm gonna just tap people on the shoulder and be like, excuse me, would you like to Netflix and chill?
Well, hey, I give you a
Grubhub
ton
and
of
chub
props.
rub.
Oh God, I give you a ton of props though, because I feel like with your comedy career, you go out like so much more than I do and meet people. Like you're meeting people at open mics, you're networking to try and make new friends and like get into like their comedy shows and writers and all
Yeah,
of
but it's
this.
the bottom of a barrel, and it's a barrel full of monkeys. So it is not where you want to be shooting fish in a barrel. Let me tell you that.
Okay, well, it's better than where I go to meet people, which is my own house, and I never leave it, and it's just me and the boys. And when I
So
say boys, I mean
funny.
cats. I
Yeah,
mean
so funny
cats.
how the gays and the cats that come to your house don't bring Prince Charming on their arms for you.
So weird. I don't understand what I'm doing wrong, but I'm sure my mom has some notes. So okay. Well, what's the solution, Bex? Do you jump off? Do you jump off the dating apps and just give? I don't know. What do you give a try after that?
You know what? I mean, I'm not even looking at it as like a problem that needs a solution. I'm kind of just looking at it as like, this is where in my life I'm feeling like an amateur, like a beginner. Like, this is my familiar way of operating is through this sort of the dating app prompts you to have conversations with each other. It's like an imposed mixer, and going out on a limb and being like, where do I feel like afraid of starting that conversation in the real world, or deepening that already existing relationship with a friend I already have, or just like reimagining how I think about dating, coming from a place of feeling like a little bit of an amateur, or a little bit of a out of my depth. So I'm wading into
Well,
the waters.
I live vicariously through you and your dating life, so
Oh
we're in
no.
those waters together, Bex.
Well, good
Sweet.
luck to us. Okay. What kind of waters are you swimming in over there?
Speaking of waters,
Mm.
jumping right into that deep pool of atmospheric rivers. We are both
Oh boy.
from California. Well, we live in California, and um, we've had a lot of weather recently. These episodes don't always come out right when we record them. So this
Jackie, is
episode
this
is
small talk? I thought we just did the small talk. Now we're back to the weather?
we're back to the weather because we live in it and we want to know how it works and what do you do if you're like you hear some weather's coming and you got to prepare for it.
So we're
How do
talking
you make
about foretelling the forecast. We're talking about the weather forecast.
we're talking about forecasting the forecast
Wow.
and understanding it and what you do with it and what you do with that knowledge. And you could do like some people do and just say screw it, I don't like it, I'm gonna wear my Daisy Dukes and my flip-flops in a tropical storm, and that's my life.
No, I think this is great because it is one of those things that, like you said, we're living in it. It's all around us all the time. And it's just one of those things that we get so used to it, we don't even notice it anymore. That's the whole point of your environment, is it's like your environment, and you tune a lot of it out a lot of the time. But until those moments when it comes right to the forefront because it's disrupting your life in some way. And it's like, that's not when you want to be, on top of understanding the weather. You want to kind of have some resources before the storm hits, so to speak. And also just, yeah, should you wear your suede boots or should you bring an umbrella and some rubber boots?
Good question. Other question, Bex, what weather have you lived through?
That is a good question. So I grew up in Joshua Tree where there were definitely earthquakes, and we had a family dining room table that was made of one. It was a bench on either side with a table in the middle, like picnic style, one solid piece of wood. And that was like our family earthquake plan, was go hide under the solid piece of wood table, because you're looking for things that are solid, one piece, they don't have seams, they're not going to break in two. So that was kind of like, oh, you always grew up knowing like that's where you go. And also I think the logic or the like rule has changed on whether you're supposed to hide or you're supposed to seek shelter inside of door frames or not anymore. So that's sort of the
Wait, are
extent
we
of my
not supposed to
knowledge.
go in the door frame?
I think I've heard you're not supposed to go in the door frames anymore. You're
Where
supposed
do
to
I
go, and
go?
I don't know. That's the thing, is I didn't have anything helpful to follow it up with, so I was hoping you wouldn't call
Just
me on that.
TBD.
TBD. Yeah, we're
TBD.
gonna find out.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
then I remember dust devils, some of my favorite
Ooh.
things in life. Just
Mm-hmm.
like a little mini version of a tornado, but harmless, just desert swirling around. Those are fun, magical moments. Then when we lived in Texas, it was like, I feel like every city has this saying, but they would always say it in San Antonio: if you don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes, it'll change. They were always saying that about San Antonio, but it was true. They'd have like big, you'd have dry hail where you just have like
Mm-hmm.
thunderstorms, no rain, hail. Or you'd have like crazy torrential downpour, more thunderstorms, no hail, flash flooding, that kind of thing. And then just heat, 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 cicadas all summer long.
That's yeah, okay. So I had some of that. So the quick change in weather in Florida I experienced, because that's you get, the tropical storms that just roll in. It's a sheet of rain coming straight towards you. It douses you and then it leaves, right? Didn't have the hail as much in Florida. Experienced, hail in California. I've experienced earthquakes as well. But hurricanes, we definitely had hurricanes in Florida where we had to like go get in the bathtub and try to like, well, actually we never had to get in the bathtub. We just had to like close the shutters and then prepare if it was going to get bad enough. This is the 90s, so I don't think hurricanes were as extreme as often as they are in the last few years that Florida's experienced. And then I experienced like snow. I haven't experienced a blizzard, but some snow in Oregon, but not, I wouldn't say anything crazy. You were in
My
Philly
first
though.
snow, yeah, my first snow was in Philadelphia. That was the first time I saw snow. And I was, 17 or 18. And I just remember being like, I'm in a snow globe. It's so beautiful and magical. And then, like, the next hour, I was like, I'm over this. Everything has turned black from car grease. And everything here is made of metal and glass and is cold to the touch. And you get in this, like, that like the bottom of all these high-rise buildings where no sunlight reaches you for 5 months of the year, and then it's summer and everything smells like trash for the whole summer. So that's a whole different environment. But when I moved to Boulder, that's where I really loved the snow, because it's
Yeah.
just, there's just mountains and grass and big sky and no tall buildings, so it can just 3 feet of snow, just dump. Everyone's totally fine. No one freaks out. Go about their day. And it's very soft and quiet and peaceful. And then the sun comes out, melts everything, and you're like, let's make dinner, and everything's back to normal.
So that the second one is how Bend was and what I experienced. Very similar as to Oregon is to the Colorado. And I think it's that high desert, right? Like
Yeah.
because it can heat up quickly but get cold quickly. So, okay, so we've definitely experienced some variety. No volcanoes, no
Mm-mm.
tornadoes,
No.
tsunamis. That I
Uh-uh.
hard pass on any type of tsunami or anything like that. That sounds terrifying.
I have
Um,
I have lived through a flood in Philadelphia that I actually wrote a poem about it, and it was published in a little poetry
Oh.
journal. And I remember it was just like one of those things where I was just shelter in place life. I was like, I don't have anywhere to go. I'm not going to fly back to Texas. I'm a broke college student. My rent was, $300 a month. I just was living dirt cheap life. I remember like going to the grocery store and stocking up on things. And then my apartment was like a half floor up. There were stairs up to my apartment, and it was flooded to the first stair. And I
Oh,
was
that's
just
terrifying.
trapped in my apartment for like 48 hours, just eating bagels and cream cheese.
That's terrifying. That was in Philly?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that
20,
would that yeah. So the
10,
first you were on the
21.
second floor, you said?
I was on the first floor, but we
Okay.
had like stairs half a floor up. So
Okay,
like
got it.
basements were flooded. It was, no good.
Wild. Yeah, flooding sounds really terrible. And I think that's like the other thing that we've experienced in the last few years with climate change is that we're having like different types of weather than we've necessarily experienced. Like California, we have now just a fire season that is just fire all the time. And then we have a torrential downpour this winter where we're
Uh-oh,
just
liberal alert. Someone believes in climate change. You snowflake.
I am definitely a snowflake and I like snowflakes. So
I want to see snowflakes not go extinct. Okay.
exactly. Well, and so I think that's the thing. It's we've experienced so much and so people who live in some of these areas like Texas getting all of this snow the last few years. Like how do you prepare as an area for all of these changes and as not only just an area but like as like an individual. Like I feel like being from California, we used to just worry about earthquakes. When I lived in Davis near Sacramento a few years ago, we got zoned for evacuation, and that was terrifying. Like I didn't have a fire plan; I had a earthquake plan, like, and I definitely don't have a flood plan for right now. So,
Yeah,
uh,
well, I'm thinking this is going to be a very complex issue when we do talk to our expert because I think there's going to be very limited scope of application for what an individual can do with information about the forecast versus what prerogative certain municipalities, cities have to take care of their residents because there were just these huge infrastructural challenges. My parents still live in Texas, and when an electric grid is not prepared for that kind of strain and stress of snow and ice and protecting certain wires from temperatures and what to do if this grid goes out and like just things that never had come up before now become these challenges of how people then lining down the block for gasoline or clearing the shelves of certain goods because the system just isn't prepared and ready for the kind of strain it's going to experience with these new weather patterns that have never been in those areas before.
well, and I think furthermore, like you think of the initial fallout from like the weather a weather differentiation. I was reading an article recently about there's a city I think it's called Corcoran or something down I believe in Southern California, and it is downhill from a lot of the mountains that have gotten snow this year. So even though the snow did not affect them, what's happening is the runoff from the snow is basically going to go overflow these levees, and if they don't replace these levees they could lose this town of like basically I think it's like 20 to 5,000 people, and that's because like they're not they were able to sustain themselves through the rain that came, but they're not able to sustain themselves through the snow melt off that you don't initially think about when that weather hits.
Yeah, I
So
mean
there's
that's the climate, right? It's all those pieces. It's not just the weather that's happening, it's a system of weather that is, finally dependent on all this all it's all linked together. It's all, it all goes back to the same world. And what
well,
happens, it's the butterfly effect, flooding here is going to affect tsunamis somewhere else.
well, that's actually exactly where I was going to go. The other part that I think is really complex about weather and understanding like the weather in general and how it works, but then how its impacts of it is I mean, when people are like, "Oh, yes, and there was a high pressure pocket of, cold air over here, and it hit this, like, tidal wave that came off of Jamaica 4 years ago, and, that just created a high pressure storm that now is here." And, like, that like you were saying, that butterfly effect, that these small things that can change the littlest things in weather, and when you see, like, these predictions and how far they are off sometimes, and there is no, to my understanding, no calculation that is replicatable for every storm to predict what is going to happen. And
Okay,
that's
well,
just
speaking of those types of models, I think here's what you need to foresee the forecast. You need
okay.
a weather vane. You
Okay.
need a barometer. You need a thermometer. You need a
Okay.
windsock, and you need a seismograph.
Damn, Bex.
And you know what? You can use the same seismograph for your ghost hunting. So
That's right. That is right. Wow. I think you just used, well, definitely
I
twice
just
as
threw
many words
everything
as.
I had in, like, from field trip memory. I'm
Mhm.
like, I
That
don't
was
know
nice.
how
Did
any
you
of
get
that
humidity?
relates.
Humidity matters
How
too.
well, I can tell that from my hair. I mean, a big part of how I tell the weather is walking outside. I'm like,
That's
how do I
great.
need to get dressed today? Let me actually leave my house for like 2.5 seconds. Okay, let me see. Now I'll build my outfit from this, because this is what this is all about, right? Is how we're going to build our outfit based on the weather.
Well, I was about to say, like, we travel so much, and that's when I use it. So, like, the most often, right? Because I can go outside at home, but I have definitely gone on a trip before and been like, "Oh, it's gonna be warm. I'm gonna be fine. It's Florida," and they're like, "Yeah, there's a week a year in Florida that's cold, and you found it." So,
Lucky winner of the coldest week in Florida.
right? So it's like, also when you're going out of your normal area, you want to know what to pack with you, what outfits to bring. Got to
Hmm.
pre-plan those, like, those little daily do's.
Yeah, it's part of the respect you have to have when traveling is respect for Mother Nature. What else do
Okay.
you need for weather forecasting?
Computers. Oh, did you ever
Computers.
watch Twister? You need those little, like, ball things that they let go in the storm. You know what I'm talking about? Just
All
me.
things they let go in the
I
storm.
feel like they looked like a little birdie from, like, badminton, and they, like, let,
Okay.
like, thousands of the. Did you ever see Twister?
No.
Okay, I feel like that's the one where, like, they're like
I thought that
they're
was a
like
ghost story.
no, they're tornado chasers. And
Oh.
they try to chase down all the tornadoes to, like, scientifically study them, and then they let these little, like the little birdie from badminton, like, little, like, but they're like mechanical or virtual. I don't know. There's something,
They're
and this is the
VR.
'90s, and then they, like, understand the storm because all the little birdies fly around in it. Okay,
Okay. Well, I'm going to be excited to learn about some new tools then, apparently. I don't know beyond that. Like, I think maybe some past data. You could use your
oh,
computer to access past data to see trends.
that's a good one. You totally definitely need trends. You need algorithms. You
Hmm.
probably need computers that do these things faster than we can.
Yeah.
Uh, oh, and then you need, like, the green screen so you can, like, show where the weather is, and you
Yeah, and
know.
then you also need some like fun colloquial jargon to report this weather, so you can be like, well, the devil's beating his wife today. We'll have some sunshine with light drizzles, or whatever, like you're like, oh, God's bowling. Look
God's
out,
bowling.
thunderstorms on the horizon.
I knew exactly what that one was. I didn't know the first one.
What are some other, yeah, write us in at we'reexpertspod@gmail.com with your weather colloquialisms that you always thought were normal, and we'll reassure
Hmm.
you that we've never heard of them and they're
Never
crazy
heard
but cute.
once. But then I will try to casually use them in conversations, and people will make fun of me. So there is that to look forward to. Okay, what else do we need to understand the weather, understand the forecast, and then dress accordingly?
Hmm. You know what? I think I've got a lot to learn in this area because,
So should
yeah,
I.
I think there's some common myths. Like even I was just made aware that when the weather person is like, "Oh, 30% chance of rain." And you're like, "It didn't even freaking rain." Or they're like 80% chance of rain. And you're like, "It didn't even rain. Like what is this 80% chance?" I heard, and this could be untrue, this is totally unfact check, that 80% means it's 100% going to rain in 80% of the region. And that's
I
like the
heard that on a
difference.
podcast recently, so I
Well,
don't
now
know if
there's
it's
another
true.
podcast it's on.
Yeah. But I heard the same thing, which blew my mind, and I was a little broken on that
Yeah,
one.
so I don't really understand that metric or what it means, but I'm sure we'll be able to apply our expert to give us some of this information that's going to help just the regular person like you and I.
And then also, I want to know why a humid 68 feels warmer than a dry 75. I gotta know.
Mm.
I gotta know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
All right.
why do I love humidity so much?
I don't know. I don't know. Because you're a lizard and you like to just capture all that sun and warmth and all that goodness with you.
Mm-hmm. Sign me up. Okay, well, let's go have some fun in the sun and find out if we can be experts. Welcome back to We're Experts Now. It is currently 70 degrees and sunny with a chance of a fabulous time. Jackie, who do we have today?
You are always so much better at that than I am. I can never do the intros quite like you can. We have actually, this brings me back to my politics days. This is a friend of mine, Matt. We got to know each other back when I lived in Sacramento.
Yep.
Him and I were always road warriors in different places, experiencing life, seeing those pictures. And he has such an interesting career and trajectory in what he does. So, Matt, please introduce yourself and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk some weather. It's one of those things where I run into people and they start the small talk and they're like, "Oh, how about the weather?" And I'm like, "You just opened a whole can of worms with me." Like I'm ready to just like dive in and start talking some serious weather. But the reason I'm like that is because I'm an atmospheric scientist or meteorologist, as more commonly known. So I studied that. I studied physics in undergrad. I studied atmospheric science in grad school. And for the last 18 years, I've been working for a company that we basically are trying to help quantify dollar risk to really big catastrophes. So we're talking about like hurricanes, really bad thunderstorms with tornadoes and hail and wind, winter storms, floods, wildfires. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is figure out, okay, how much is that going to cost from like a building perspective? So how many houses is this hurricane going to knock down, or this flood going to take out? And we kind of work with insurance companies, banks, governments to make sure that everybody's got enough money to help pay out those claims and rebuild those houses when it's over. So it's
you during Katrina is what you're telling me.
Yeah, in fact, it's interesting because I started my job right around Katrina. So I just dove into the deep end and actually got to go out and do some like on the ground reconnaissance during that time, which was just very intense, very intense. Yeah.
Well, all that important stuff aside, the real headline is we're here to get our revenge for all the times we wore the wrong outfit when you told us the wrong weather report.
I know that's always the saying is that, meteorologists, they can be wrong 60% of the time and still get paid.
Yeah. But as an event planner, I do not get that. There's zero room for margin for error on mine. Yeah. Well, that's okay. So first off, I think like you said you studied atmospheric. I forgot the rest already.
Yep.
And how do you even find yourself there? Because I feel like that's such a niche place to get to.
It really is. And for me, it was one of those things where growing up in California, we kind of have like two seasons and it's either on or off. It's either going to be really, really hot, dry, sunny, beautiful, or we get, these atmospheric rivers, big storms coming through. And that even as a kid, that just like really interested me. So I started with like one of those little backyard weather kits where it was like the little plastic rain gauge and the little like anemometer that sways in the wind and the whole thing. And I used to like write down measurements and everything. And I had so much fun doing that. But I always knew I was a scientist. And I went into physics because it's pretty broad. So you can kind of do a lot of things out of that. But I went from California to Wisconsin to do physics. And living in Wisconsin was like, whoa, what is all this crazy stuff that happens with the weather? Where it can be 70 degrees and beautiful at 10 a.m. and snowing by dinner. It was just insane. So that really like just sparked that interest for me to say, I've got to figure this stuff out. And the physics gave me like the good background to do it. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, atmospheric science is kind of an umbrella term. So it's
Pun
not just like,
intended.
I know, right? We were talking about some of those weather, idioms. So there you go. Yeah, I mean, it kind of captures not just like forecasting, but how do we understand the physics with what's going on with clouds, with the atmosphere acting kind of like a fluid, all these different things that end up going into forecast models. All the stuff that you all were kind of talking about, like what do we need to build a forecast model? Well, you need those computers and you need physics to do it, and that's a huge part of that.
But you really were doing this since you were a kid. You that first weather kit was like a child, something you were interested in even as a child.
Absolutely, yeah. I was interested from the get-go. Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
so you've gone on this path, you've gotten to here you are, you've gotten to see all these. I mean, I'm sure you have so many notes as well on the changes that we've seen in the last 20 years. I mean, I remember kind of I want to say wildfire California. I must imagine that preparing companies and governments for that is vastly different than what you're dealing with, now, where everything's really, really unpredictable. We are on fire one month in California, and then the next month we are flooding. So it's kind of you get everything at once. So before
job security, I'll just say that.
Yeah, I mean, job security. I'm putting you on my apocalypse survival team.
So, okay, how did we score on trying to understand how the weather works? I know we didn't set ourselves up for success here because it was mainly questions, but
I'm going to at least give you a 5 out of 10 because
wow, okay,
you all were asking some really good questions. You're asking the right questions.
okay.
And I think that means that, if we scratch the surface, there's something a little bit more going on underneath. So I like that. I thought you all had very good curiosity and you were kind of understanding where to poke and prod a bit. So I'm going to give you a 5 out of 10.
We understand that there's weather. So that got us halfway there.
Right.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So let's start with how do we understand the weather? Like when you wake up in the morning and you're gonna, talk to some people about what's happening, what is your basic starting point?
Yeah, I think in order to kind of get to where we are and what that kind of short-term forecast is, it gets back to like a lot of the stuff that you two were talking about where you need to know what's going on now. So I know you talked about like we need to have the weather station. We've got to have the thermometer, the rain gauge, the anemometer. We were talking about humidity, so that's like a hygrometer. There's a lot of that stuff that we have to be able to just understand, well, where are we now? Where do we start? And ultimately going from there forward, we need the physics. That's where we need all of the models. We need all of the science. We need the equations to plug in. And the other thing is, we've talked about weather stations, and that's all on the ground, right? But we need to know what's going on in the upper atmosphere. And the fun thing that we do for that are weather balloons. So they actually stations, they release the balloons, they go up, and they give us a really good profile of what everything's doing in the atmosphere, from the surface all the way up to the top of the troposphere, which is basically the layer of Earth where all the weather happens, all the cool stuff happens.
Okay, question. Are you privy to when they're not actually weather balloons then?
Well, so
we're talking about UFOs already, Jackie.
There is a defined network where we know where the balloons are being launched. So if we're seeing one that isn't,
okay, I once did acid at the New Mexico Balloon Fiesta. Okay, so I know all about that. Sometimes they don't launch. It's very disappointing.
Oh, wow. Okay. So balloons do exist. They are real things. They are not all UFOs, but it is possible that there are sometimes UFOs, and you're going to let us know when they happen.
That's right. I'll give you a call.
Okay.
So the balloons have all your special tools on them and you send them up and they kind of are automated to do it themselves, or they have people in them?
No, they are automated to do it themselves. They
Mm.
have little sensors and trackers, and so they're feeding all of that information and data back to the weather service forecast office. So they get all of that information, and they usually launch 2 balloons a day. So they'll do kind of one more in the morning, one in the afternoon to just kind of understand how the atmosphere is changing.
And that's per each like local weather station, or that's like for the country?
So there's basically they kind of divide the country up into regions. And I would
Mm.
say like for each state, there's at least one, if not multiple weather balloons that go up. And so what that
Oh.
does is they can kind of take a look at what the atmosphere is, go back to their prior forecast and say, okay, how far off are we? Is it doing what we expected? And if it's different, then they can kind of adjust the forecast models and say, okay, well, actually, it's a little warmer in the upper atmosphere than we thought. So let's go ahead and plug that into the models and see what it does with it.
How did they do that before technology?
There's a lot we didn't know about weather before technology. Forecasting was basically
Zeus and Poseidon.
yeah, really. And you think about like a lot of the forecasting that they did in Europe was all based on shipping reports. So the ships would be out at sea
Oh.
and they'd be like, oh, yep, there's a storm. So we'll report back. And that's how they kind of knew, okay, there's going to be something coming, within a few days or whatever it might be. So we've come a long way with weather forecasting in just the last century. And even going back to the 1800s, 1700s, there's phenomena there where they just didn't understand it, like hail. They had no idea how hail formed. Now we know. Yeah, it's so funny. I've like gone to these old antique bookshops, and you can get like these like science textbooks from the 1800s, and they just have no clue. They don't know what causes hail. Like, we don't know. It just ice balls fall out of the sky. We don't know why.
God was
Witchcraft.
angry. Yeah,
Exactly.
You touched yourself at night, and now God's yelling at you.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then I feel like they just came up with like sailors just had little rhymes like green wave, sailor's fright, red sky, sailor's delight. Like that was the weather report.
Red sky at morning, sailor take warning. Exactly. And it's
Okay, I was close.
you were very close. See? It's a lot.
Jackie didn't think I had something there.
You got it. You got it. So the other thing that we have a huge advantage on in the last 75 years are satellites. And satellites can do a lot. There's a lot of information they can provide. The only drawback is that you get it at kind of more coarse resolution. So it's usually, a mile by mile or 10 miles by 10 miles. But satellites are really good at being able to say, okay, what's the temperature at the surface? How much moisture is in the atmosphere? Which way are things moving? And what that really helped out with was hurricanes.
Yeah.
Because, you think about, Florida in the early 1900s, people didn't want to live there for 2 reasons. One, they didn't have air conditioning, so you can't do that. And 2, they had these really bad storms that would just come out with no warning. They'd be a surprise. And so that's another one of those things where maybe they would get some information from a ship that was passing by, but more likely it would just come upon them. And there's a book actually out there. Oh, now I'm forgetting it. It's about a hurricane that hit Galveston in 1900. And it was the deadliest hurricane in U.S. history. And it's because nobody knew it was coming. They just had no clue. And they couldn't get off the island. So
her and I were just talking about this, like, what's the scariest ones? She didn't always grow up in California, so she's like, earthquakes are pretty scary. And I'm like, oh, yeah, hurricanes out of all of them are the easiest. They're coming. And I never really put that together that, like, if, 50, 100 years ago, that completely changes it, because then hurricanes would be one of the more terrifying ones. You're like, oh, storms rolling in, and then all of a sudden your town's flooded and your house is gone.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm a little mind blown right now.
So,
or like mudslides, or I don't know, weather events can be so terrifying. You're just swallowed up by a sinkhole one day.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's crazy people like me who go chase the crazy weather events. So that's one of the things I did in graduate school. And professors, they can't sign off on it for liability reasons. But for them, they're thinking, hey, they're going to go put their skills to use. And they're going to figure out all the things they need to figure out to identify where the tornado is going to form. And so we used to do that back, I don't want to say how long ago it was, but, but before we had cell phones that had the nice radar imagery and everything on them, we'd have our NOAA weather radios. We'd hop in a car, after we'd looked at the forecast at a library somewhere, and you just go and you watch the sky. And, you usually know, especially in the Great Plains, which direction the tornadoes will generally travel. So you can stay behind them and just kind of follow them along. But where
Mm.
But
people
you
get in
said
trouble,
generally. You literally said generally.
generally, there are exceptions to that. There are definitely exceptions, and that's where people can be caught off guard. But yeah, I mean, it's tornadoes are just so interesting because they're so short lived, and they're over such a small area, but they're so intense and so terrifying.
Yeah, I mean,
This
I
is
never thought you
romantic.
were an adrenaline junkie. Like I always was like, oh, Matt's a scientist. Never like, oh, he's out there like chasing
I
tornadoes.
know.
Like,
I'm picturing him in the mystery van, storm chasing, with the little steamy glances exchanged between
Right.
colleagues.
or that's honestly that sounds so terrifying. I don't even like just you talking about it made me anxious to like be sitting there waiting for like a tornado. Like, again, that's something I've never experienced. When I was driving across country, I got a warning on my phone that said like tornado warning near you. And I called my mom because she grew up in Illinois, and I was like, where do I go, mom? Like, and how do I know to go there? And she's like, well, do you see a tornado? And I was like, no. And she's like, you're fine. Like,
Yeah, and if you did, what are you supposed to do?
I know. Go down to
You
the
know?
cellar.
go to the ditch.
Exactly. Don't go underneath the overpasses. That's not a good place to go. Yeah,
Okay.
because those act like wind tunnels, and it just funnels all the debris and everything right at you.
So you want it to
I,
go over you, not through you.
yeah, exactly. So if you get to the lowest point, all that debris that's going to hit you and cause problems, that's going to fly right over the top of you.
I'm just
Okay.
going to stay away from places that have tornadoes ever, is actually my plan.
You can't avoid the weather, Jackie.
I'm trying.
There's some kind of climate wherever you go. Well,
And
I'm hearing.
unfortunately, I was just going to say all 50 states have had tornadoes, so it'd be tough to find that.
Oh, what is the okay? So tornadoes are like atmospheric pressure events, and hurricanes are like that plus water.
Yeah, so it's thinking about things on a different scale. So for hurricanes, I mean, these are storms that are hundreds of miles across, and basically the ocean water, the warm ocean water, is what causes those to come into being. So you get these little low pressure systems that generally in the Atlantic move off of Africa. They're moving west, and as they start churning, they create a vacuum at the surface along the water. And when you have a vacuum, air needs to like get pulled in, and that air gets pulled in, and it has nowhere to go but up, and that's what creates the clouds.
I thought
So
it
it
was
starts
going
going
this
up.
I
way.
thought it was going down.
It does. So eventually, when you have enough of it, it starts to circulate because of the rotation of the Earth, and you get this hurricane that's going just again hundreds of miles across, just causing devastation. But
This
thunderstorms are
air?
different.
Is this the air that's
Yeah,
going
so
on?
in the individual thunderstorms, it does this. And as
Okay.
it's spinning around the storm, it comes down in the middle, which is why in the really intense ones, you get a clear eye. Because when the air goes down, it evaporates, and when it goes up, it condenses. And that's one of the most fundamental things in atmospheric science. Air goes up, you get clouds. Air comes down, it dries out.
It's atmospheric science 101, Jackie.
That-
Okay.
It's good to know. It's good to know.
I'm doing a lot of hand gestures.
I know.
which
For the
typically
listeners,
means
the
I
funnel
don't
went.
get it. Yeah.
For the listeners, the funnel went up, the pressure came in, and eventually it all came back down.
I'll draw a diagram for folks.
Okay, I'm hearing a lot of like meter, anometer.
Anomaly?
Wait, I'm gonna try this. Anometer. Nope.
Animer.
Anometer.
Anemometer.
Anemometer. Hydrometer. What are these? Are you using the metric system? Are these like what is the actual unit of measurement? Is this like molecules per inch? Like
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we do use the more like metric standard scientific units. So for temperature, we're not even using Celsius. We're using Kelvin. So which is
Ancient.
Celsius, but you add on a couple hundred degrees. But it's all stuff that can be relative, and you can use it not just on Earth, but you can think about temperatures on Mars or other planets, and being
So you
50 to 100 degrees Kelvin.
aliens is what you're telling me. This is how we're getting to the truth.
That's right. That's right. Oh, I've been found out. Yeah, and the hygrometer is really interesting because I know a lot of people when they talk about humidity, they're always like, it's 70%, it's 80%, it's 50%. And I like to think about it more on an absolute scale. because like 50% humidity at 60 degrees and 50% humidity at 80 degrees, that just feels very different.
Yeah.
And so, it's all relative, but there's an absolute measurement that they call the dew point.
Okay.
And that's one where you can kind of compare, the dew point in California versus the dew point in Kansas, and be able to say, oh yeah, it's more humid in Kansas. And what that temperature means, that dew point, that's the temperature which you'd have to drop to be able to get air to condense, and you start getting dew. So when you get dew on your lawn and everything, that means you've hit your dew point at that night.
That's the
The
little
air-
fairies that come and sprinkle the dew on the lawn
Exactly.
in the morning.
Exactly.
That's how I thought it worked. Okay. The air has condensed because it went down, right?
Yep. Well, it's
And
condensing because it's nighttime. It's cooled off.
it's
Yeah,
cool. And once it condenses and it's cool, that number that creates moisture is the dew point.
exactly. Because air, when it gets colder, it can't handle as much moisture. So at some point, it becomes
Okay.
completely saturated, and there's nowhere for that water to go except to start collecting on things and falling out of the air.
And when it's hot, it can have more moisture.
You can have more moisture.
Well,
The air can hold more.
That's how
Okay.
you make sun tea. Put your tea out in the sun, you chock it full of sugar because it's all hot, and you can add more sugar to it, and then it gets cool,
Exactly.
and then you have Southern sweet tea.
I thought that was serious for a second.
That's serious.
It is serious.
It's like
very
I don't know.
serious.
That I learned, it was like a small science fact I learned as a kid. Like you can't make tea as sweet as it needs to be for a Southerner in a cold temperature. It has to be hot because it can absorb more sugar.
Okay.
Absolutely. I like this. We're getting somewhere. I'm loving this.
I think I've learned more in this conversation than I did in my 4 years of college.
Okay, I wanted to ask about the atmospheric river because that's something
Yeah.
that us Californians have been hearing a lot about lately because we've been having absolutely torrential downpours lately. And what does the term come from? What does that mean, atmospheric river?
Yeah, so it kind of gets its name because it's really a kind of channel of air that's coming all the way from the tropics. So this is coming from down past Hawaii, and it's this really warm, and because it's warm, air that can hold more moisture than the cold air over the continent. And during the winter, when you get the jet stream to dip down into the tropics and it starts moving back up north over the west coast, it's basically pulling all that water from the tropics in the atmosphere and sending it right up against the coast. And so that, as it's moving, it starts condensing, it creates clouds. But the really big part is when it hits the coast, it hits land, it hits mountains. Basically, that land just takes it like a wet sponge and squeezes it, and all that water comes out. And in California and Oregon and Washington specifically, a lot of our winter rainfall comes from these really strong atmospheric rivers. But as you can imagine, the warmer the atmosphere gets, the more water you can start holding in those rivers. And it really is. I mean, if you think about the volume of water that are basically contained in these rivers, it's like 10 to 15 times what's in the mouth of the Mississippi River. So it's huge.
Oh.
It's a ton of water.
And we are still in a drought almost every year because we don't know how to collect water in this state.
I
Well
thought we were
done,
out of the
everyone.
drought.
We're part of the state's out of the drought, right? I'm
But
gonna
for
ask-
how long? How long will we be out of the drought? That's the question.
Well, I think that's my follow-up question as, someone who actually could answer this question versus when I ask my friends. Do you think that we'll have will this continue, or do you think what happened this last year with California with the atmospheric rivers was kind of just like, oh, it was a weird year, these things happen, or is this a trend that we might see more often?
Yeah, I think when you look at historical data for California, we tend to go in these kind of like 3 to 5 years, turn on the faucet, turn off the faucet. And so I think we're probably in for another 1 or 2 years of above normal winters. So that's typically how these things last. And then we'll go back into several years of dry. And I think, when you add climate change into all this stuff, it's going to make it way more variable. So it might be that we get shorter but stronger periods of above average precipitation, but then we might have longer and more intense droughts. And the atmospheric rivers themselves might be more and more intense. And that's where, we got to make sure that all of our flood infrastructure, our levees, our dams, our rivers, all of that is, upgraded to not just look at what history has been, but what we can project in the next, 20, 40, 100 years. There's a lot to think about.
This is fascinating. Like
Yeah.
just the weather pieces itself and how that works, like fascinating because it makes so much sense what you're saying. Like I think, Bex and I in the first part like had a lot of pieces. We had no idea how to put them together, but your explanation of the atmospheric river, I was like, oh my God, that makes total sense. And so I think that's the piece moving forward into the other part of kind of what you do is not just understanding it, how do you apply it? And then
Yeah.
furthermore, how do you get people to listen to it?
That's a big one. Yeah, that's a really big one. And, a lot of it comes down to talking about people's pocketbooks, dollars and cents. That's where the rubber meets the road. And that's a lot of the work that I do is trying to help people understand what are the things they can do to help harden their houses for wildfires, hurricanes, floods. And, what are also the things you need to be thinking about when it's wildfire season or there's a big atmospheric river coming. You got to have your go bag ready. You got to have all of your emergency stuff ready and just, grab the dogs, grab whatever you got, throw it in the car, get out of there. Because I've seen people that have tried to ride out floods. It's not fun. You don't have electricity. You don't have running water. A lot of times it's really humid. So it's not fun. Get out of there. Don't stay around.
Yeah, if my cell phone dies, I'm in the dark ages. Like I don't know how to operate in a society without my tools. But I imagine and I have a friend who's a hydrogeologist, and just anyone who's kind of in touch with water resources and atmospheric sciences, I'm sure there's a lot of dark clouds out there about what is going on with climate change, but there's always a silver lining. And yeah, I'm curious about kind of what you see in terms of how we can adapt with the changes of our environment, and are there sort of things that you're aware of that we can move towards kind of progress and ways that we can meet these challenges?
Yeah, I think it's not all doom and gloom. I think, where there are areas that are going to be much more difficult to live in, there's going to be opportunities. You think about areas of Canada, which will now support different types of crop life that they couldn't before. So agriculture can grow. Yeah, there's huge areas, large land masses in Canada and across Russia and Asia that all of a sudden they can support different types of crops. So I think, there's going to be opportunities. And I think for us as a society, what we're going to have to do is first kind of identify who are going to be the refugees, the ones we need to reach out to first and say, okay, we've got to do something. You're in a dangerous place. It's not going to work for you long term. And that's actually something that the country of Kiribati in the Pacific Ocean is doing, because most of that country is within 10 feet of sea level. So
With
it's
Congo, right?
right.
Like they're having the same issue. I actually was reading about this
Yeah.
recently, so I got really excited when you brought it up because they're literally countries that will absolutely disappear.
Yeah. And
There's
so,
what do you do?
yeah. And like Kiribati, for example, they're already working with other countries to say, okay, when it gets bad enough, can we start sending folks, to reestablish, citizenship wherever it might be, New Zealand or the Philippines or somewhere else that's kind of close by. So that's one of the things that we're really going to have to start looking at is who are those people that are going to be affected first, and how do we help them? And then I think there are things that we're going to have to do to our infrastructure to make sure that we kind of stay ahead of the game. So, Jackie, you mentioned one. We got to make sure we have the right reservoirs and ways to capture the water that we get, because we may have longer periods of drought, but we also may have these periods like this year where we just get a ton of rain and snow, and let's figure out how we can harvest that. And I know that there were some areas that said, "Hey, let's let the aquifers underneath the ground replenish," and so they let water just sit on the surface so it would go back underneath. And it's like, yeah, let's keep doing more of that. Let's be
A
ingenious
really
about
good
this.
idea. Yeah. Well, and I think like you hit on it with like the refugees, like my fear becomes is, as somebody who lives in a country, Western civilization that has a lot of privilege, I don't have that much fear about myself and my family and their experiences, but there are these large amounts of people who, if they live in a zone, they can't afford to leave. They can't go anywhere else. Or you know what? They don't want to lose their culture because that's been built into society or their society for so long. And it just opens up so many of these other question marks. So I'm glad that you say that there's opportunity, because that is helpful, because I think we hear about is what we're going to lose, not what we're going to gain. Um, but it's also like it's terrifying, because I think it touches on this like social issue of, yes, I think lots of people will be fine, humanity will be keep going, but what are we doing for those people who are at most, disadvantaged by what we've all chosen to do to this planet?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of responsibility that we need to take to do that. And I think when you think about the United States, it's going to be folks along the Gulf Coast, Louisiana, specifically Florida. They're going to start feeling this, and already have been feeling this before a lot of the other people across the U.S. do. And it's interesting. There were comments made, and I'm going to stay way out of politics, but let's just say one of the governors of one of those states said, well, if the sea level really comes up, people can just sell their houses and move somewhere else. Who are they going to sell their houses to?
Yeah.
They're going to be worthless at that point. You won't be able to get insurance. They're going to be underwater. They won't have resources. So you got to think way ahead of that. You can't wait until the water's at your front door.
All right, I'm moving to Ohio now.
Okay, so that's a question I have. I have heard that, what is it? It's Michigan is like
Yeah.
the place to go, because that's going to have like the least amount of like looking at the way that weather and climate change is going. It's going to be like the optimal place with the least amount of weather anomaly. I don't know what to call it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's a great term, weather anomalies. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. Yeah, and that actually, when I think about it, that seems plausible to me, because, again, as you start going further and further north, it's going to be longer growing seasons. It's going to be shorter winters, not as gray. So it may actually be a good spot, except watch out for that lake effect snow in Michigan. That's what you got to think about.
The what?
Lake effect snow.
What is that?
It's a fun, cool phenomenon that happens in the Great Lakes, where early in the season you get really cold air from Canada that comes over the lake, and you've got warm lake water. That's a mouthful. That basically just that warm air wants to go up, so it just rises and rises over that cold air, and it creates snow that just hovers over the coastline of the Great Lake for hours and hours and hours. And they had this issue in Buffalo in the last couple of years, where they had feet upon feet of snow, and it was right along the lake. And as soon as you started moving inland, that snow dissipated, and by the time you were 10, 15 miles away, there's not a snowflake to be found. So it's really weird, very local, but one of those kind of fun, funky things that happens regionally.
That is wild. Okay, spontaneous human combustion. Is this a weather
Oh my
thing?
god.
Well, it probably does depend on the temperature outside, the humidity.
This is
There's probably a lot going on in there.
Yes, I don't actually, you know what? Everything's just a weather anomaly now. There's no paranormal. We figured it out, Bex.
It's just the weather. It's the weather. That's right.
So it sounds
right.
like you may not be, a doomsday prepper who's out there trapping rainwater on a rainy day, but does your house have all the weatherproofing upgrades and are you ahead of the forefront on that?
The nice thing is that my roof is a patio, so I can get up there and look at any part of it and make sure that it's secure, that I don't have any leaks in my roof. And of course, I've got my weather station up there. I've got a rain gauge. I've got an anemometer. I've got a temperature sensor. So, I'm always ready to go.
Do you have your own weather balloon?
I don't. I gotta get on that. I really do.
How big is a weather balloon?
So they're I mean, the computers and the sensors in them are pretty small, but the balloons are fairly large.
Okay, so you should keep it in your backyard, let it go any day.
I have to, call the Sacramento airport and get clearance to let that thing take off and all that fun stuff. And I'm sure people would try to shoot it down anyway.
Yeah,
they would think it was an alien, just like me.
Exactly. What is that?
Okay. Mm-hmm. So I think that's my next question. Bex hit on it. What are some recommendations for the average person? And maybe we stick with California for a second, but a few tips and tricks for anybody else. What do we want to know to make sure that our houses are safe and our friends are safe?
So I think when it comes to wildfire, it's all about, how much defensible space you have around your home. So if you're living, not necessarily in the city core, but you're out in the suburbs or the rural areas, you don't want plants and trees that are coming right up to your house, because as the embers start flying, it's going to catch on those. They're ember accumulators. Those are going to combust, and then all of a sudden your house is going to be it's going to be ashes. So definitely make sure you keep all that stuff, a defensible space around your house. I'd say that's usually number one. Number two, if you own a house, clean your gutters. Make sure you don't have all that stuff kind of collecting in there, because embers like to find that and they just ignite. So keep those clean. But, as I was mentioning earlier, always have that go bag. Have some stuff where you know where it is in the house. You can throw it in your go bag and you can be ready to go somewhere for potentially a couple of weeks. Hopefully that isn't the case, but that's always better than, you're trying to scramble around at the last minute thinking, what do I need to take? Write a list just so you know off the top of your head, like, okay, I've got all my important papers here. I've got my pet and my pet stuff over here. I've got my clothes over here, all my medications, all the essentials.
I love
yeah, have that ready.
Already has it. Mm-hmm. I do already have a go bag because I am a paranoid individual. But I think that there's always, like, you should always reassess it and check it, make sure you got all the stuff that you need.
Yeah, I think our generation, it's, once you hit 30, you've got a go bag, 3 friends you want to start a commune with, and a kombucha starter. Like, that's just prerequisite.
Yeah. I have
that's standard.
Mine is a sourdough
Absolutely.
starter. Thank you.
Sourdough starter.
Right?
Ooh, yeah. It's a good one. And then you all can get together and then you have sourdough and kombucha. It's great. Have a picnic.
Okay, what about for the flooding then?
I think for flooding, it's going to be pretty similar in terms of, like, have your go bag and everything ready. I think for flooding, it's going to be a little bit more difficult because it's harder to, if you own a home, protect against flooding, because water is just this big, powerful force. So make sure, the street gutters are clean. If you have really important stuff, if you happen to have an attic or a second story, store stuff up there just in case the water comes in. But floods, don't stick around. Get out of there. It's miserable if you're stuck around for a flood. That was a lot of what I saw when I was kind of going around New Orleans after Katrina. It's just the water just destroys everything. So get out of there. Go somewhere nice. Go to a nice hotel. Stay with friends. Whatever it is, get out.
Yeah, flooding is definitely a terrifying one. And I had never thought about put it on the second story, right? Like, I was thinking, oh, I'm glad I live on the second story. I moved between when we've kind of started to clear up weather. But yeah, I never thought about that. That's a good place to put it because it's safe up there from any weird stuff that can happen on the first level. I mean, yeah.
And, also, I think about this just because of what I do for work, but, have some insurance. Even if you don't own a house, if you're a renter and you're on the first floor, it's not that expensive to add some flood insurance on there for, your contents. So that way, if a flood happens to come in, maybe you don't own the house, it's an apartment, but you'll get a check for all the stuff that you lost, and then you can replace it. So that's important. And flood for homeowners is not a standard part of your policy. You have to ask for it specially. And that's a really important point that a lot of people miss, unfortunately. So, I make sure I've got my flood policy. Don't listen to whether they say you're in a flood zone or not. Just get one, because there's no such thing as in or out of a flood zone. If you're somewhere where it rains, you're in a flood zone.
Okay, so pretty much everywhere then, I'm guessing.
Yeah, which, if you're on top of a hill, great. That means your flood insurance policy is going to cost you, maybe $100 a year. If you're next to a levee, it might be more like $1,000 a year. So, just get it. It's gonna. If you're not next to anything bad, it's going to be cheap. You won't regret it. You'd rather have it than not.
These are the tips we need. These are the tips we need. Okay, so it sounds like you're more working, as a scientist, sort of behind the scenes on a, infrastructural or maybe even corporate level. Have you ever done the, master of the green screen point behind you stuff?
Never for an actual career. But I love forecasting. We used to have forecast competitions when I was here in grad school, and those were so much fun. And also, when you're thinking about, like, atmospheric rivers or snowstorms or thunderstorms, somebody like me is going to be looking at forecast models, the beginning of the day, like, oh, what's going to happen? Where's it going to be the worst? We just kind of do this as a hobby. Whether we're in front of the screen or not, we're having fun with it.
What
no matter
is a forecasting competition? And how do you win?
So what they used to do is they would pick, you'd have 2 locations you'd have to forecast for. One of them was always there was a weather station at the college, the university, and then they would pick at random some other city in the U.S. They'd say, okay, this week it's going to be Pittsburgh. So you'd have to pick, like, the high temperature, the low temperature, the amount of precipitation, and basically whoever had the lowest error or the lowest difference between all three of those, then you won for the week.
It's like a
And it
fantasy
was so much
football
fun.
league type of thing versus like I was expecting that someone's in the screen and has to like get to the right places. I don't know what I was thinking.
That's a different type of competition, but yes, those happen
a whole
too.
new meeting to draft picks.
That's right. That's right. But you were talking about forecast. I want to get back to something you said on the previous podcast, talking about percentages. You're talking about statistics, and most people, statistics is not native. And so I'm here to help clear up what that 30% and that 80% and all those funny percents mean. So when you look at a weather forecast, you're looking at your phone, it's saying, all right, there's a 30% chance of rain today. What that means is, given all the conditions that exist as they are, 3 out of every 10 times it ends up raining. And I think you guys were onto something. It's rain within a certain distance of where you are, so in that region. So it's not just at your specific house or your location, but it's within like 25 miles. 3 out of 10 times it's going to rain there. So it's really tough because unless you say it's 100% chance going to rain or a 0% chance and you're wrong, you can't really say a forecast is wrong. Because if there's a 30% chance of rain and it doesn't rain, okay, well, then that's that 7 out of 10. So that's good. But if it does rain, you say, oh, yeah, that was one of those 3 out of 10 chances it was going to rain. So that's how we talk about that. And I personally, I don't like to look at percentage. What I look at is a lot of the apps now have what they call a quantitative precipitation forecast. So underneath, you'll see like the high temperature of the day. You'll see the weather. You'll see the percent chance of rain. And sometimes they'll have this like 0.18 inches underneath that. And what that's telling you is how much rain is going to fall. And to me, that's more meaningful because it can be 50% chance of rain, but is it 50% chance of a drizzle or a 50% chance of 5 inches of rain? What is it? Because that's going to dictate what outfit I wear today and whether I bring my umbrella or not. Which is really what we're getting back to.
How many inches is a lot?
Yeah, and that's subjective too, because it depends on where you live in the U.S. Because if you live somewhere like Florida, a quarter of an inch to a half an inch of rain during one of those thunderstorms in a day, that's normal. A half an inch of rain in California a day, that's pretty good.
I feel like
that's a decent amount of rain. Yeah, so I mean, for me, I basically think anything below a tenth, and it's sprinkling. If it's below a tenth, it's sprinkling. If it's above like half an inch, it's going to be some pretty decent rain. It's going to be pretty good. So, you think about, again, like California during atmospheric river season, we were getting a couple of inches a day. Like that's some pretty serious rain.
And why does it seem like more rain here than it does in Florida? Is it because it like dumps really quickly and then goes away?
Yeah, in Florida, you think about it, it's a lot warmer, way more humid, and so the atmosphere holds a lot more water. And so when you start lifting those clouds, all that water just dumps out at once. So it's all coming at one time. It rains really hard for like 15 minutes, and then it's over. In California, it rains light to moderate all day, and sometimes for several days. So it just kind of continues. And that's what really kind of makes it different.
I've also heard for us SoCal people that since it doesn't rain very frequently, the oils in the roads and the asphalt is generally, it's there. So then when it does have those infrequent rains, it's released and people do, that's why you get these crazy drivers because we don't get that oil release that often. So it makes some roads slick.
Yeah, it's like you're driving on ice. So like in Northern California growing up, whenever you had that first rainfall, which was usually October, right around Halloween for some reason. So it'd like to ruin, our chances of getting good candy. But yeah, that would be the first time it would rain in months. And basically a lot of the roads would turn into like ice just because of all that oil and everything else that accumulates. Yeah, you're so right about that. So you got to be careful when it doesn't rain for a long time and then it does. Just don't drive. Just don't go anywhere. Stay away from those people.
Okay, so what have we missed? I mean, I could sit here for hours and ask you questions because this is like, I knew it was going to be interesting, but this is fascinating. But I think before we do a 10-part series on this, what else are we missing? What else needs to be known? What do the listeners need to know?
So I want to get back to another question that you asked, because again, I thought you were going down a really good, path of thought there, where you said, okay, if it's 68 degrees and it's like 50% humidity, why does that feel like it's warmer than if it's 75 and like 10% humidity? And that has everything to do with evaporation in our skin. So when it's dry, all the water that's coming out of your skin, it just evaporates really quickly. And when air evaporates, it cools off. And so when it's humid, your skin is not evaporating as much, which is why it also is really easy to get like heat illness in humid weather, because you sweat, but that sweat just kind of stays there. It doesn't cool you off. It's not doing what it needs to be doing. And so when it's more humid, you have a hard time evaporating that sweat and causing that cool evaporation on your skin. And so it feels so much warmer. So that's, for somebody like me who, if it's at all warm, I just sweat like crazy. So the humidity, not for me. I like the dry.
Cold place unless I'm in a pool, and then humidity and heat, it's fine. But no, wow. I'm mind blown right now. Like, is
that why older people tend to like the humid places? Because they're all dried out.
And I mean, to be serious, your circulation isn't as good when you're older, so it's hard to kind of like keep those extremities warm too. So yeah, there's just a lot of stuff it's not working as well as it did when it was, a brand new model.
It was never a brand new model. I'm already old and tried out. Wow, that one blew my mind. Like, I really was just going to think that you were going to be like, yeah, it's because the air is heavier when it's warm, or I don't know what you were going to say.
But yeah, it's like another one of those things of like reality is, so much determined by our experience of it as well. And like, not just the conditions, but also what we're working with, our skin,
And now I know that I'm more dried out than Bex because I don't like the heat. Is that what it was?
I mean, does anyone like the humidity? I don't know if anyone really likes the humidity, but I like a hot, sunny desert climate.
Yeah, she does. She's a little.
Oh yeah, it's nice. You get that sunshine. You don't feel like so stuffy, and then it cools off at night. That's what I'm all about. Okay. I got to be nice and cool when I sleep. That's all there is to it.
Okay. Is there anything else? Otherwise, I hesitate to say that Bex and I can sum this up.
I'm going to give one more just very, very quick safety tip, because this is a huge thing when it comes to flooding. Most flooding deaths happen because people try to drive through flooded waters. And the reason is because when you think about water, it's a lot stronger than you give it credit for. It only takes less than a foot of water to completely swipe you off your feet. So if it can take less than a foot, imagine for your car, 2-3 feet, that car is going down the river. So just don't drive through there. You don't know how deep it is. You don't know what's in the water. You don't want to know the pollution and everything else that's in there too, even if you make it through.
But
just don't do it.
Always keep your life hammer in your go bag so you can pop those windows out.
Yeah. Exactly. So I just had to make that plug because that's one of the big things that I was at the National Flood Conference this past week. So it's very perfect timing. And that's one of the big things they're always saying is turn around, don't drown, turn around, don't drown. And they show that pie chart that says, it's like over 60% of flooding deaths, people driving into water.
Well, and I'm terrified of drowning in my car. Like, it's a legit real fear of mine. So that's very good advice. I also would never drive through water because of that fear.
Like, that's not hole. It's got water in it. I'm not going to turn around. Go home.
Nope. That's right. No, we're getting out of here.
Over bridges. So, I've made progress in life, but the river, I'm not driving through.
Don't do it. I mean, they do have those, what they call those ducks. I know San Francisco has some of those. And when I went to school in Wisconsin, they definitely had them where, they'll drive on land and then you just drive them right into the water and then they're a boat. But unless you have one of those, don't do it. If you have one of those, do it as much as you need to. Just have fun. Go for it.
Oh, man. Okay, Bex, are we ready to...
And that was our sports summary. Now, over to Jackie with the weather.
Well, this is a mental breakdown because my notebook just says things like Kelvin, evaporation point, forecast. Like,
forecast.
Okay, you start with your tools. You want to have your computers, your satellites, your weather balloons, an anemone.
Your anemometer, hygro, your
Ding, ding,
hygrometer.
ding. Good job.
I said that. I
I heard it. I was just repeating it.
and you wanna know your physics because you want to know how to take those readings, use physics, and apply that to what is happening around you and understanding the world.
Yeah, so I guess you're taking in the
That's
info with
perfect.
your tools, your measuring tools, and then plugging it into some kind of model to kind of interpret that information.
And that model probably comes from
You got
historical
it.
information that we use with past weather balloons and tracking and weather stations.
And you're updating it. Yeah, you're updating
I'm
it
loving
because
this.
you could get some information from some of your tools, but then maybe the weather balloons give you more up-to-date, accurate info. So you're constantly updating it and never pleasing anybody. Why won't you people be grateful?
And there is something called a dew point.
Ah, the dew point. It wasn't fairies in the night that put the dewdrops on those blades of grass. It was science.
It was science because the air got heavy and it couldn't hold moisture. And so when it hit
Cooled
the
down.
grass, it turned into water.
And it all depends on where you are because the humidity in one place is going to affect how you feel the heat differently than the heat that you feel in another place.
Yes. Just like our atmospheric river, which goes down sometimes into the cold station area. No, it's cold stuff that goes to the hot area.
It hits that hot landmass of the western
And then hits the landmass and then gets squeezed like a sponge and gives us all the water because I don't know, it just goes up and gets hot and cold and goes cold. That's literally what I wrote.
And now, if you want to be a storm chaser, you've got some extra GPS and satellite tools that can help you not blunder right in front of it, but chase behind it at a respectful distance.
And the weather, you can understand that because if it says 30%, it means 3 times out of 10, not rain in 30% of the area. And something about quantitative rain distance.
Close.
Oh, that was about
Close.
how much rain is actually falling. Quantitative accumulation. I don't remember. It's not just like, 50% chance of rain. How much rain?
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's right. Because we want to know how much rain there is because that's going to change what outfit we wear.
Yeah, because listen, in Southern California, we only wear parkas just to participate in fashion, okay? We don't need them, but we want to wear them.
Okay, what? Bex, are we missing anything else? We've now said every word that I wrote down.
Let's see, did I miss any? Infrastructure.
Oh, Kelvin. We read it in Kelvin because you can then read that on Mars.
Oh, yeah. Drops of Jupiter, all
in
that
her hair.
stuff.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've run out of steam.
I'm just proud. I'm really proud. You all did a really great job. I personally would give you 9.5 out of 10. There was just a little bit with the atmospheric river, but you got the basic concept right.
Do we get invited to the next forecasting competition?
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's on. It's on. We'll start easy. We'll be like, okay, Oakland, California in the summer, where it's going to be, 75 degrees every day, and then we'll go harder.
Is
there
a place where the weather changes the most frequently, or I don't know? Is there one they're like, oh, Boise? I don't know why I picked Boise, but
a lot of the places that are east of the Rocky Mountains, they have the most variable weather. In fact, I want to say it's Rapid City, South Dakota. They experienced the largest temperature change ever in one day, where they went from in the 70s to about zero within a few hours. So yeah, you get east of the Rockies, and that's where you get these different air masses that meet together. And sometimes it's the tropical one, and then a nice polar air mass will come and just scour that right away, and it changes on a dime.
For the country
it's
or
crazy.
the world?
It's fun.
Like, is the east of the Rockies one of the most crazy ones in the world?
It is. In fact, we have more tornadoes and severe thunderstorms than anywhere else in the world. And it's that area, that tornado alley just east of the Rockies. That's where all the magic happens.
Does anybody other countries get like a lot of tornadoes?
Canada, just because the Rockies and everything kind of extend north of the border. You do get some in areas like Europe near the Alps. They get some good storms. There's some places in Asia near the mountainous regions. A couple places in South America, but we've got it. It's us.
Mountains and rivers, huh?
When you come back for the next part, we'll pick a weather phenomenon and we'll just deep dive into
Let's just
that.
go right into it. I love it.
Okay. Anything you want to plug, anywhere we should find you? Like, we want to thank you for coming on, but if you want to share any message, this is your time to share it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just happy to be able to be here and share science. It's one of the things that I do for my job, trying to explain science to people who, it's not their native language. So I'm sort of here on behalf of myself, and I've got some, social media. I nerd out and have some great pictures of weather every so often. So if you want to come see some cool looking clouds, come on over to my Instagram or my Facebook, and you'll see some fun stuff.
We will link that, and yes, that's so cool. Like, so cool. Any other last words? Because I feel like we're just going to keep asking you questions over and over again and go on for 6 hours.
Just keep your eye to the sky. That's all I can say.
Love it. All right, Jackie. Well, I'm going to go update my flood insurance renter's policy.
Yeah, I'm going to go try to decipher all of these words that I wrote down in some manageable way and, have a nervous breakdown. But yeah, we're going to have hope in the future because there's going to be opportunities that are opening up when we're experts.
That's right. It's not all doom and gloom.
That was great. And that was the show. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we hope you stay curious.
If you enjoyed this video, watch our other videos here on YouTube, or you should listen to the episode on We're Experts Now podcast. Bex, where can they find us?
You can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeart Music.
And what if they want to talk to us?
If you have ideas for something you want us to investigate, send us an email at we'reexpertspod@gmail.com. That's wereexpertspod@gmail.com.
Great job on that spelling.
Ooh.
A+. Do you do this professionally?
I believe we're both doing it professionally right now.
Wow. People should know about this.
I completely agree. And you can find us on Instagram at We're Experts Now Pod.
Thanks again. And if you enjoy the show, subscribe and comment, and do not forget to leave a 5-star tip.
That's a great idea. Are you a podcast expert?
I think we both are. I think
we're experts now.
This has been a Just Being Better Media production.